Okay, so what we're going to do in this last one for week 7, which is going to be a little shorter than the other ones. I know you might be relieved. We're going to refactor some of that average code to make it more reusable. You'll see what I mean. And then you just have to code along, make sure you have working code. And then in your README file, okay, so let me just bring it up, right? So in this week, this 013 folder we've been working, you should have a README file. I believe you have a couple things in here, so you can just end with feedback, because every week I generally ask for, like, how did this week go, right? So, how well do you feel you understood the code and the concepts this week, right? All right, so let's do a refactor here. So I'm going to open up the main.js. Couple things I'm going to refactor. One I just started talking about last time here, which was like this could be made even better. Okay. But before I did that, I started doing a little research because I know that a very common practice is when you have const up in your global space. And could be anywhere, but typically, generally, when you have them setting out in global space, you capitalize them. This is very true in Python. So I think it's a good coding practice to do in our class as well. So one of the things, and this is a great use for this functionality of find and files and replace, right? Is that the one I want? Hold on, I think, is that the one I want? Let me try this again. Oh, it's in here. Yeah. So if I do it over here, it's going to look through all my files. But if I'm in the file itself, it should give me the, oh yeah. So that was find in files. This is the replace. So this will do it in the document you're in. This will do it in all files, which could be handy. So I'm going to say find my MPG and then replace with my, and you can either use underscore. So notice how they do it here. So I think underscore, right? MPG. And then what will happen is you can see, okay, here are the different replace, you can look at the different instances, but if you're confident that's what you want, replace all. And then I would say, and so for my trip cost, I'd want to replace with my trip cost. Okay, so generally when you have a constant in the global space, again, they specify anywhere, but I definitely think it's more appropriate in the global space, replace all. And then when you do something like that, make sure your code still works. That's way important, okay? Because we definitely could have broken something else there. So it's like, okay, 13 looks good. Hit the inspect. Everything looks good. Okay, to start, that's what I wanted to do. But now what I want to do is right here where we've calculated the sum, okay, I think it would make more sense to actually have const calculate, or let's just say, well, no, let's say calculate sum, okay, equal, okay, arrow function. Okay. Now, how are we going to do this? Well, what we can do here is we can pass in the array, okay, and then we can iterate over, determine the sum, and return the sum in just this function, and then call it multiple times. So let's just kind of see it. First thing I would do is I'd pass in an array, because that way I can pass in different arrays to this function, right? And then I would say let sum equal 0. So I would set that up, and I would go ahead and write the for loop. Now I could just go copy the other one, but it is good to actually write it. I less than or equal, or just less than, and in this case, array dot length. Remember, why am I doing array dot length here? You'll see it in a minute if you don't already see it. And then I'll take I and I'll plus, okay? And here, right? So I'm going to say sum equal to sum. And actually that's plus equal. I could do that as well here. I might, but for now, I think it still is good to see it a little plus. Uh, so array dot, right, array sub I, or the index that we're on, right? So that adds a sum, and then you can just return sum. But this little function, which is really more along the lines of a nicely formed function, is going to make this code so much more efficient, and you'll see why. So now for sum of MPG, we can actually just call sum and pass in, right, my MPG. And instead of setting it here, sum my trip cost. We can get rid of all that. Let's see if I did it right. Let's see if I forgot anything. Sum MPG. Okay, let's see if that worked. And then we'll talk a little more about it. Oh, my bad. My bad. What did I forget here? Duh. I called sum. What I should have been is calculate sum. I was thinking sum because that's what it's going to do. Okay. See if that fixed it. Cool. All right, so now let's walk through the code. Let's actually just walk through this first line. Okay. So when we get to this first line, right, we're not passing anything to it. We're calling calculate sum. We're passing in first my MPG, which is that array. There we go. That's the array. We're going to iterate over it, set up the sum. Okay. We know several times. We're going to run through that. Now, look at what we've done here. I should have talked about it as we were doing it, but that's okay. So because we've passed in my array, then when we are inside the function, we've somewhat, this is a term you often hear in programming, abstracted it away, or given it an abstract name instead of a specific name, because then we can reuse that function like we're about to do here on line 29. And by the way, if I didn't want to actually run through that, oh, you can also see it returned that value here, so I can use it in a moment. If I did not want to watch that, all that happen, right? There's actually a way here I could just jump over that line. That's another way of learning how to use dev tools to kind of like, because once you've seen something run, if you understand it and if it was working well, then you don't necessarily need to watch it, and you can just jump over things. Like here, I could say, okay, jump over that. I got that. And also the other thing I didn't have you check out, but it is good to check out when we're calling this is the stack, right? Because we definitely here when we call average, okay, we determine the averages. We're actually having this function call this function, and it'll be placed onto the call stack. And then when it finishes, it completes, it takes it off that call stack. All right. Okay, so we did 2 refactors on this file. Let me ask you, right? I'm having you give me feedback about this week. But does this refactor that we did, does this help, or does this make it more confusing for you to understand what's going on? Also refactoring the constants up in the global names, the global space. Often you hear the term namespace. Okay. I'm also going to get rid of those. Okay. So would that be, what does this make it? I think it makes it more readable, if you ask me, right? And it also makes it more concise, meaning you want functions that have clear inputs and clear outputs. Relatively small things, not a lot of things going on. You'll see as we kind of move into the next part of our class. And actually, talking about that, one of the things I'm going to probably do for week eight, is, right here where we are running track. Well, wouldn't it make more sense to set up a form, right? So now we need to get the user input right here. We're actually calling a function passing in values. But when you think about apps, that's not the way they work. The way they work is a user enters data, we capture that data and somehow present it back to the user, both in its raw form, or in this case, it's not raw, it's actually processed form. Okay. So, very commonly, right? So, you get input from the user, you process that input, and then you present it back to the user in some way. So, that is the input processing output fundamental of programming. And so, where we have been simulating, in a sense, what the user would input, now next week, let's actually you create the form that would take the input and present the data back to the user. And in that process, we'll also start introducing the next major concept of, and the one that it's either everything is a primitive value or it's a object. And you'll see this next week. All right. Hope you have a good week. All you have to do here for this one, again, it's a little easier on this last one, right? Is just how well do you feel you understood the concepts this week? Any feedback you'd want to give me? And then your message, your commit message would be refactor and feedback, and then just submit the URL. Okay, have a good one. I'll start working on week 8.